Hello and welcome back to the Coin Stories podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brunell, and I'm talking to leading voices in Bitcoin and macroeconomics about their origin stories, Bitcoin headlines and news topics, and this movement to fix the world by fixing the money. This podcast does not provide financial advice. Before I share this week's episode, here are some messages from my sponsors who make this show possible. First of all, are you ready for Bitcoin 2023? I certainly am. This year's Bitcoin conference was absolutely amazing. I got to spend a week in Miami with tens of thousands of Bitcoiners from around the world, and I'm so grateful that I had the chance to anchor Bitcoin Magazine's live desk and MC the main stage. If you missed the event, you can catch all 3 days of incredible Bitcoin content over on Bitcoin Magazine's YouTube channel. And also, it's never too early to start making plans to attend the next conference. Bitcoin 2023 tickets are already available and super early bird rates do not last long. So you can visit b.tc/conference/2023 and secure your pass before prices increase. This show is also powered by OKCoin, my favorite place to DCA without the crazy fees. OKCoin recently launched an amazing initiative called Crypto for All, which is aimed at democratizing knowledge and access to Bitcoin. OKCoin is one of the fastest growing and most secure global cryptocurrency exchanges that serves all your needs for Bitcoin and is committed to investing in educational content, funding crypto developers and entrepreneurs from underrepresented groups, and helping more diverse talent work on crypto ecosystem projects and careers. OKCoin has actually contributed more than $1 million to Bitcoin core devs and counting, has one of the most active Lightning nodes, and recently launched Sats mode. To open an account and start stacking, head to okcoin.com/Natalie and get $50 in Bitcoin when you sign up. All right, I'm super excited to have with me today in Oslo, Troy Cross. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to talk a little bit about our thoughts, our conversation right before we started recording, of just your impressions of the Freedom Forum and how you really get a sense of how much abuse of power there is around the world. So what do you think?
Yeah, it's incredible to be here. It's really powerful. The speeches are moving, but I was saying it sounds in some way like you're hearing the same story over and over again. It's the same kind of oppression tactics. It's the same kind of theft from people. And it just begins to sound almost scripted. Mm-hmm. It's almost like I'm waiting for the characters to play, to type, and then they do. Mm-hmm. Which is, in a way, it's deeply depressing realization that there's something about human nature that abuses power when power is given, or that is at least a very common thing that humans are prone to do, and then they abuse it in the same exact way.
Right. Yeah, and it's not a Bitcoin conference, but yet the principles behind Bitcoin are so relevant here and becoming more and more interwoven every year. It seems like this is the solution that a lot of the speakers are talking about.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the solution, but it's a tool that's very obviously useful, and it's hard to watch any of the sessions without thinking about that as a Bitcoiner. Mm-hmm. In what ways are people being financially oppressed or controlled in ways that Bitcoin could help? But then again, I don't think Bitcoin fixes tyranny entirely. Part of realizing that this story is just one story told in slightly different ways is realizing the problem is deep. And Bitcoin is like, it's one tool, kind of like an unstoppable money, kind of like the printing press. But the printing press is also a useful tool, right, to fight dictators. A lot of this conference is about journalists and their the need for telling the truth about what regimes are doing to their people, right? But journalism didn't end oppression.
Right.
Bitcoin won't either. I think that's just a reality you have to deal with.
Well, as a philosopher, when you hear these stories of oppression around the world, what does that tell you about human nature?
Well, I think it's pretty dark. I think it's just something that, for instance, the founders reflected in the Federalist Papers, that power has to be divided against itself, that it's dangerous to concentrate power. It's a lesson about centralization, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And thinking as a Bitcoiner, it's a deep lesson about the dangers of centralized power. If it can be abused, many people will abuse it.
Well, does it make you think more bullish or bearish thoughts about adoption of Bitcoin going forward as it comes into conflict with these powers and regimes?
Oh, that's interesting. I just really don't think bullish, bearish very much. I'm weirdly not at all price or even adoption focused so much. But it's hard not to see the need for money that cannot be tampered with, uncensorable, open, a monetary instrument. It's impossible not to see the need for it. At the same time that I see people need it, those people aren't necessarily representative of capital. And I also see capital as wanting to control money. So in terms of the bull bear case, right now there's another forum happening in Davos, right? The WEF, and they are pushing cryptocurrencies in a big way. They're also behind the campaign started by Chris Larsen, co-founder of Ripple Labs, to change the code of Bitcoin, an absurd campaign, right? But that's capital trying to shut down this insurgent money, right? And so the real bull-bear question is like, who wins in that fight? And there's the question of who wins in the market, which is reflected in price. And then there's the question of who wins in terms of adoption. And it's like what we see when you look at transactions, buying and selling Bitcoin. Where is that happening? We see it happening in nations that have high measures of monetary repression and high levels of corruption, right? But those economies don't necessarily get reflected in price, because what matters in price is like Elon Musk buying a tremendous sum of Bitcoin, or GBTC investments, or if a hedge fund moves in, if a pension fund moves in, right? So I guess the bull bear thing is it's bullish for freedom. It's bullish for the use of this currency. And it's just a big question mark for me on the narrative for the privileged parts of the world that don't necessarily need Bitcoin to escape oppression. Like, will they recognize this tool for the good that it can provide in the world? And will they back it monetarily? I'm less in touch with that. The answer to that question would be really speculative for me. But I'm bullish on freedom go up, and I'm bullish on its actual use cases. It's impossible not to be here. Yeah,
me too. Well, that's a really interesting take. And I know you do so much work educating the public about the environmental impact of Bitcoin and trying to, just correct some of the misconceptions out there. So I want to get to that. But first, I just want to learn a little bit more about you, because I like to go back and hear origin stories. So are you originally from Portland, where you live?
No, I grew up in Michigan, rural Michigan.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your young life. Like, what got you into philosophy? What did the young Troy want to be when he grew up?
Well, I had no idea what philosophy even existed. I grew up very poor, and out in the countryside, raised animals, cut our own wood for fuel. It was pretty grim when I think about it, but actually it represents what a lot of Bitcoiners fantasize about, the citadel life, right? So growing all your own food and vegetables, having animals in a farm, and it was very beautiful setting, right? So it's like a hard life, getting up early, working really hard, but at the same time, you are close to everything that matters, I had a beautiful, wonderful family and community. So I had friends, I had everything that matters in life, But my parents are both curious people, and my mother was educated. My father ended up getting an education when I was growing up.
Wow.
He he went into education, became a professor, and then became an administrator, and then eventually led the University of Wisconsin as the system president.
Wow.
Right? And so all of my family kind of migrated into education. We all went on and got PhDs. It was kind of our way out of the rural ghetto, to just like get a PhD and go teach somewhere. Philosophy was just something that clicked with me. I took a philosophy class my sophomore year of college, and it was like, these are my people, this is who I am and how I think. It's just that they've been scattered throughout history, and they're much smarter than I am, and they're thinking about the same problems. I fell in love with it. I was good at it, and I fell in love with it. And then it was just it's been a wonderful life, actually, to be able to do what you love and have someone pay for it. And what I love is just ideas, discovering ideas, and that feeling of seeing something new and then sharing it with other people. It's just super rewarding. That's what teaching is. And watching them gain mastery over a new set of skills. And of course, that's also what drew me into Bitcoin. It's an idea. It's one of the most beautiful ideas I've ever encountered. And it just pulled me in, like it pulls in so many Bitcoiners. Pulled me in as a beautiful idea. And then I also wanted to share it with others. Of course, who thought I was crazy? But
well, were you predisposed to anything? I mean, just by the way that you grew up, or were you thinking about money or financial security and how that related to philosophy and then Bitcoin when you learned about it?
Well, I taught at a number of kind of prestigious institutions, and a lot of my students went to work in the finance industry, sort of pre-2008.
Yep.
And it was just like kind of like the common destination. Like you'd go to this Ivy League school as a young, bright-eyed idealist, and you would end up getting funneled into Wall Street.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened to a lot of my students. And nothing against Wall Street. It's a lot of fine people there, but it was kind of gross in the sense that it seemed to limit the great human potential that I saw coming in and the idealism that I saw coming in, right? But also I learned that you just get rich in finance. I mean, they work hard, like work long hours, but the fundamental mechanism was just sitting next to the money printer.
Right.
Growing up in rural Michigan, you don't know about that. You don't realize that there's a whole system of access to money. And all you need to do is get connected and get a tiny straw into that giant hose of money, and you achieve levels of wealth that are unthinkable for people where I came from, right?
Yeah.
And then realizing that was just tied into a kind of a history of privilege, and it was exacerbating inequality, grossed me out. And then 2008 happened. And yes, I was looking for alternatives. I looked into e-gold. I did peer-to-peer lending.
Wow.
So I was set up to, and when I did peer-to-peer lending, I really learned what advantages banks have. I was like, okay, I cannot fractional reserve lend.
Right.
I can only lend what I have.
Yeah.
Right? And it was like, we can't replace the banking system by disintermediating it with peer-to-peer lending because it's got an advantage we don't have. Like they can make up money. They can create money, and I cannot do that. We cannot do that.
Right.
So it was like, there's a structural injustice here. And I didn't protest with Occupy, but I was very sympathetic to the Occupy movement, right? So when I found Bitcoin, it was like, this is a decentralized e-gold that cannot be taken out in the way the e-gold was, that disintermediates the entire banking industry with code. And it distributes the power that these institutions that, my people, were never had access to the entire world, anybody who wants to run a node. Right. And it was like, that was, wow, mind-blowing. So it rectifies an injustice, but it also challenges the idea of what money is, what value is, and, the reigning economic paradigm.
Well, so were you actually searching for Bitcoin? Because your story almost reminds me of someone I recently met. I went to Austin. I met someone who's been in Bitcoin since 2010, and literally he was Googling because he had the same sort of feeling about the overall system. He was looking for an alternative. He was Googling decentralized digital currency in 2010 and came across Bitcoin. And so he, as you could probably guess, is very well off now.
Wealthy.
Okay, he was mining it and kept it, believed in it. He was going to create his own currency backed by ethanol. Anyway, so were you searching for Bitcoin? Is that how you came across it?
No, I wasn't that smart. I didn't really think about decentralization as a possibility. No, my wife, who was my girlfriend then, found an article in 2011, sent it to me and said, you'll find this interesting, and I did, and I found the white paper, and I fell down the rabbit hole and spent 2-3 weeks in the basement, just on the Bitcoin Talk forums, just putting all my questions out there.
Wow.
About how it could be attacked, how it could fail. And that was also a great experience. I kind of loved the Bitcoin Talk forum experience of a bunch of, I guess we call them plebs now, but I don't know that vernacular was in use then. Just a bunch of ordinary people mixed with brilliant computer scientists, but also they were just teenagers and there was, I coming from the academy, there's just kind of a strict hierarchy, but this was a free for all, but a pursuit of knowledge, really smart people swapping ideas about what Bitcoin could be, how it could be vulnerable, and I really enjoyed that experience too. That also pulled me in, and I started mining in my basement. I built some machines.
This was what year?
2011.
That's amazing.
Yeah, spring of 2011.
Wow.
So, I was in it early, and also, I was getting Bitcoin through other means because
it's incredible.
I started running it on my the MacBooks around my house,
and
then I was like, this isn't fast enough, and also I want some right now. I want to buy some, and you just couldn't get it. You had to wire money to Japan, which takes a long time.
Yeah.
And the price was running up. The price was a little bit interesting to me. It was interesting as an idea, but also the price action was pretty wild. So, it was running up from when I first saw it, it was just a little over $1, right? When I first hit but then it very quickly ran up to $27, right?
Wow.
And the time it would take you to get Bitcoin, the price would be doubling, quadrupling, whatever. I also experienced the downside of that. So I bought on the way up to 27, and then I experienced 27 to 3, where it stayed roughly for 2 years. At this very early stage where it was totally experimental, right? I thought it would almost certainly fail, or maybe had failed.
Well, I was going to say, being in it that long, you must go through a transformation of, this could work, but it also could be totally taken down. And now maybe we've crossed that threshold where you can't ban it, you can't kill it, and although we're going to have volatility, it's going to grow. Did you feel like you experienced that sort of conviction change?
Very much. When I came in, even Gavin, who was running Bitcoin at the time, he'd just taken over from Satoshi, right? Running it, whatever, publicly leading the effort. He was uncertain that it would succeed. He said things like it probably will fail, but it's a big asymmetric bet, right? So it's we all thought the likelihood of its success. I shouldn't say all. There were all opinions on the Bitcoin Talk Forum. Most people, I think, thought it will likely fail, but it's just an amazing experiment, right? It was almost a protest vote for me, honestly. It was just a protest vote. It was I'm going to put some money in this because it's a wild idea. Outside the financial system, might succeed, almost certainly will fail, but it's just satisfying to do something in rebellion from an unjust system. So it's just like holding up a sign in Occupy, right? It was the same feeling. Just down with this system. Let's try a new thing. Let's just give it a shot. And if I can be a part of that and share in that feeling, it's like holding your lighter up at a concert. It's just like being a part of a social movement. And also it motivates you to learn, right?
For sure. Well, so you teach philosophy. Were you able to incorporate Bitcoin in your classes and teach your students and inform them about this unjust system?
Oh my gosh. So I don't teach philosophy really that's related to Bitcoin. I'm going to teach a class next spring on philosophy of money. I'm taking a year of leave from teaching just to do Bitcoin stuff. Okay. But I'm going to teach one class in the spring on the philosophy of money. But I've never taught anything like that. I teach analytic epistemology and metaphysics. That's the theory of knowledge and
what is
theory
that?
of being. No,
it's English is my second language, so you got to help me out.
Well, episteme is the Greek word for knowledge.
Okay.
And
I learned something new.
Epistemology is the study of knowledge.
Okay.
And it really covers the study of rational belief in when you don't have knowledge, or the study of ignorance. It's basically what is knowledge and what is rational belief. Those are the big questions we try to answer. And metaphysics is like what is there? What exists? What are the fundamental categories of being? So kind of highly technical, abstract fields that are only indirectly related to Bitcoin. But I did talk about Bitcoin with my students. I couldn't kind of shut up about it, I have, one of my former students just sent me a tweet that he sent. I think it was 2011, 2012, where it was Troy Cross can't stop talking about Bitcoin.
Oh my
gosh.
gosh.
That was the tweet, right? So he just sent it to me recently,
amazing.
and he was like, I should have listened.
I should have listened.
Like, yeah, I should have listened up. You know,
Yeah,
he was kind of making fun of me at the time, but you know, yeah, it was. I don't know what the price was
those.
then, but it was probably $5
Yeah.
or something like that.
You should have listened.
You should have listened. Yeah.
That's
so,
awesome.
So I did talk about it. I certainly talked about it with my thesis students. You know, the students who were close to me. I was like, this is an amazing idea. What was really weird is that my students were not as into it as I was. Mm-hmm. It was like, you know, I would expect it was an idea that youth would be taken with, but I was like, let's do Bitcoin for our coffee shop. I have a coffee shop at Reed College where I teach called the Paradox Cafe. And I was like, let's use Bitcoin for the coffee shop, right? Mm-hmm. And I had no interest from students in wanting to take up that idea. They totally should have. We would have been like the first college coffee shop, like taking Bitcoin. That would have been amazing.
Well, you got to go through some financial struggle. You know, maybe these students, I feel like you really appreciate it when you come from backgrounds that really needed this type of technology.
I actually advised the college. I was at some gathering where the president was there, vice president, a bunch of alumni.
Yeah.
And I made this remark. I was like, we really need to put some of the endowment into Bitcoin. Right?
Did they listen?
This was 2013. No, of course they didn't listen. Everybody just laughed like it was a great joke, and I was like, no, I'm serious. We should really put some money from the endowment into Bitcoin. And I got an even bigger round of laughter on the second time, like Bitcoin, you know. And it was like, yeah, I think the price. I think that was 2013. So, you know, it had recently run up to like 1,200 or something, and it was down to like 600 when I said that. So like $600. If Reed had done that, we would now have, and I've done the calculations, we would have, you know, maybe the largest endowment of any college or university, like if they had put a significant portion.
You should have listened.
Should have listened, yeah.
That'll be the title of this episode. You should have listened.
I mean, I kind of did pass it off as a joke because, I mean, you can't be like super sincere when everyone is laughing at this joke, but it was like the tiny portion, it would be an asymmetric exposure, right? And sure enough, like now there are some major endowments that are invested in Bitcoin, right?
Right. Well, I tweeted the other day, like, if you just think there's even a 1% chance, why not put 1% of what you have in Bitcoin?
That's actually, I mean, I don't give financial advice, but that's how I think of Bitcoin. It's a hedge against a certain kind of risk.
Yeah.
And 1% as a hedge, it's not going to hurt you, but it could have a lot of upside.
Yeah.
And
Well, what got you interested in studying the environmental impact of Bitcoin? Because I think this is one of the biggest topics. It's certainly the one that the media tend to grab on the most, right? This FUD of this is destroying our planet. We have to potentially, if we're going to adopt Bitcoin, change it in some way to make it environmentally friendly. So what got you interested and how did you really gain expertise in that topic?
Well, I've been interested in that topic quite independently of Bitcoin for decades. And, you know, in my own life, I'm a cyclist. I ride my bike everywhere. I try to minimize my carbon footprint despite the fact that I'm in Oslo. I haven't flown here, but I try to minimize my carbon impact. And at my college, actually, I led a discussion among faculty about our endowment and its investment in fossil fuels, and I led the faculty discussion, just calling into question whether we should be invested in vehicles that speed the climate crisis. And we recently announced a plan to divest from fossil fuels over time at Reed, and I like to think I played some role in that.
So they listened to that.
Well, yeah, they didn't really excite me, but you know, I talked to lots of members of the community, students, trustees, and faculty, and facilitated discussions. And I don't want to take credit for that because it's really a decision the trustees made. But I agree with that decision, and I like to think I was a part of the process. So yeah, I'm someone who's sincere in my. I mean, I think global warming is real. I think other kind of ecological threats are real. And, you know, that's partly because I've studied the matter. It's partly because I have relatives who are climate scientists. And so for me, it's a simple kind of collective action problem. And I think it's kind of imperative to face up to the problem and do what you can to resolve it, and to do that in a decent and freedom-compatible way. anti-authoritarian way.
This episode is also brought to you by one of my favorite companies in the space, Fold. Fold is the easiest and most fun way to earn Bitcoin on everything you do. So if you're interested in Bitcoin, but you really don't know where to start, Fold is the perfect app. There's a daily wheel that you can spin every day for free, and you can earn Bitcoin, free Satoshis. Seriously, there's no catch. And one of my other favorite things is their card, the Fold debit card. You can actually earn Bitcoin back on every single purchase. So make sure to download the Fold app today. There's a referral link in the description. Well, so talk to me a little bit about just how much impact and the type of energy use that Bitcoin has in terms of the mining network. Because I have viewers who are new to the space and maybe hear those headlines and they're worried that Bitcoin's destroying the environment. Then I also have viewers who have been in it a while and they just want to maybe help explain and drive that narrative that is truthful about Bitcoin's actual impact, but they want to explain it to newbies or friends or family. So like, can you break it down? What is Bitcoin's environmental impact?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I mean, let me just back up a second and explain how I got out of Bitcoin mining.
Okay.
In 2011, I did my own back of the envelope math on mining and carbon emissions. And my math was based on, at the time, the reward that's given to the winning miner roughly every 10 minutes was 50 Bitcoin. And I just kind of calculated, what if we scaled up Bitcoin's market cap, its value, to roughly the value of gold, and given its reward, how much would you spend to chase that 50 Bitcoin reward? And I calculated that basically we would be using absurd amounts of energy to mine Bitcoin.
Like what percentage of the world?
I can't remember my math exactly. I don't have it. This was like 11 years ago. But it was ghastly. Like, it was ghastly. So I was like, I can't actually be a part of this because it could undermine what I'm trying to do in terms of like minimizing my own emissions and the institutions I'm a part of. So I didn't sell my Bitcoin right then, but I gave away my miners to a local charity. They were nice gaming machines, with like 4 high-end graphics cards each. Very nice gaming machines I gave to the local nonprofit that teaches kids how to program.
Oh, cool.
And I stepped back from the community, and I also stopped stacking. And I was mining like a Bitcoin a day at the time when I stopped. And so I stepped back really because I was concerned about its environmental impact. This was in 2011. The block reward at the time was 50, right? And now it's 6.25. So my math was completely off for now. I mean, also we were mining with graphics cards. So everything has changed. And in fact, it's in the last couple of years, really, when I revisited my calculations. And, I did a 180 on the issue.
Wow.
And it was really through reading a lot of excellent work by other Bitcoiners like Nick Carter and Lynn Alden, that I actually came to think that Bitcoin was not disastrous for the environment. And in fact, it might even be a net positive for the environment, and could speed the transition to a different kind of energy economy.
Well, can you share how and why, just simplify it though, for the average person to understand?
Okay, how and why Bitcoin could be a net positive for the environment? Yeah, well, it monetizes energy in a certain way. Bitcoin turns energy into money. That's kind of what mining is. Right? And that can be done with all different sorts of energy. It can be done with coal. It can be done with natural gas. It can be done with wind or solar or hydropower, right? but that's essentially what Bitcoin mining is. It's turning energy into Bitcoin. It's monetizing energy, right? And yeah, yes, how do I simplify this?
I know that's what's always in my brain though. Like this is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because the argument is, right, from the people that don't understand Bitcoin, they're concerned that it will lead to so much energy production and need that it will somehow accelerate climate change or the destruction of natural environments, and therefore it will be unsustainable and it will actually hurt our planet to have something like this. So the counter is what?
Yeah, the counter is that we're shifting to a new energy system. That's a renewably based energy system. Right? And in a renewably based energy system, you waste a ton of energy because your sources of energy are not adjustable, basically. So if you have a wind farm, it's always producing energy when the wind is blowing, and when it's not, it doesn't. Same goes for solar. You don't produce solar when the sun is not shining, right? So Bitcoin mining is actually a buyer of energy, and it monetizes that renewable energy. It turns it into money. And if it monetizes the right kinds of energy in the right kind of way, it can basically finance a shift to those forms of energy. And I think we see that happening already. We see mining is heavily based on renewables. Right now, if you read the Bitcoin Mining Council's reports, the percentage of energy that's carbon neutral, either wind and solar and hydro or nuclear, is very high among members. It's 65%, so it's insanely high.
Much higher than other industries.
It's incredibly high, right? So it's a good match with renewable energy, and it actually monetizes a lot of wasted and or curtailed energy, and that actually speeds the build out of renewable energy by providing an off-taker of that power. Right? So I think in general, Bitcoin mining is really good for the renewable energy industry. It kind of gets us over a hump into the adoption of renewables, to make a long story short. But it also had an idea about how that process could be accelerated. And that's why I came public as a Bitcoiner. A year ago, I didn't have a Twitter account, or I did, but I had like 2 followers. I wasn't really public as a Bitcoiner outside of my friends and a few students. It's only recently that I have been, and it's because I have this idea about how Bitcoin can finance a transition to renewables, and how Bitcoin actually kind of, in a way, needs to be bigger to do it well.
Well, there are a lot of Bitcoiners that I've read online who think that the fossil fuel arguments are actually, that the climate change arguments are not fully based in truth. They call them what do they call them? There are Bitcoiners that call them carbon hysterics, right? And there's literature out there right now about fossil fuels, how they actually are good for humanity. We shouldn't transition to renewables. I think there's an author, Alex Epstein, that just came out with a popular book in the Bitcoin space, calls them unreliables. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't read Alex Epstein's books, so I don't feel fully qualified to comment on that. But I mean, I think there's a place for fossil fuels in the economy right now, but I hope to phase them out. I hope we phase them out because they have a byproduct of CO2, and CO2 warms the atmosphere, and that's not a good thing for all the standard reasons. You can call it hysteria. I just call it science. I think that Bitcoin's role is kind of the opposite. I think Bitcoin is going to help us transition off the fossil fuel economy into a green economy. So I have a completely different picture of how this goes. Right now, the cheapest power is renewably produced power. Solar power is cheap and getting vastly cheaper. The curve on the cost of solar is incredibly steep. And The curve on wind power is also steep, not as steep. But it's basically the most expensive thing you can use to produce power right now with is coal. And
which is why a lot of miners are using renewable energy, right?
That's right. That's why they're shifting to it, right?
Yeah.
So I disagree with Alex Epstein. I think we need to move to a renewably based economy. I think there's a place for nuclear. I think we agree on that part. Nuclear provides a stable base load, but we need to phase out coal-based power, gas-based power, basically as fast as we can do it in a humane way. And here's where I also agree with Epstein and others. I don't think we should go the route of austerity on power. Like cheap power makes people's lives better.
Right. Energy is not bad.
Energy is not a bad thing. Yeah. It's a very good thing for our lives, and we need more of it. I think that if you look at the cost curves on solar, you're going to see that we're just going to produce power at an extremely cheap rate with solar, and we're rolling it out fast. And so it's kind of an economic argument. This is coming, and it's going to undercut. It's already undercutting coal. Coal's having a hard time staying in business, basically competing with solar, and it'll eventually undermine natural gas too, because it's just your cost is up front, and then the cost averaged over 30 years of lifetime of solar panels is lower, and the decrease in price is so incredibly steep. This is where power production is headed as just a matter of simple economics. It has problems, of course, intermittency. And that means that you waste a lot of power. But guess what? Bitcoin is great at absorbing and monetizing excess power. So Bitcoin miners will be parked with solar installations along with batteries, and they will act as a kind of financial battery. Right? Not a real battery, a physical battery, but they will soak up excess power in ways even the battery cannot, turn them into money, and monetize the transition to renewables. Right? Solar will be more profitable because it can monetize energy that would otherwise be wasted. And the same is going to be true for wind. So it'll speed the transition to renewables because it produces power very, very cheaply. And Bitcoin can use power in places and at times when there are no other off-takers, right? And I think that the price of Bitcoin, I think the profitability of mining is going to drop and drop and drop until it is running on marginal power. Nearly zero priced power will be the only power that makes sense to mine with because it's a perfectly competitive market. And when Bitcoin gets to that point, no one will mine it with coal because it's simply too expensive. And virtually no one will mine it with natural gas because you have to burn natural gas. Bitcoin mining network will be run entirely on basically power that no one else wants, which is signaled by a very low or even negative price. We've got all this negatively priced power right now in the wind belt in West Texas.
Sure. And
Bitcoin can monetize that, right? And right now machines need a lot of uptime, so we're not fully monetizing that power. And also there's just a shortage of mining machines. So basically we have the luxury of mining on whatever power is available and it's profitable. But as more machines come online, as difficulty goes up, power mining is going to go to very cheap power and nothing else will be able to survive. And the capex on those machines is going to drop as more machines enter the market. So I think we're in this temporary bubble right now where it makes sense to just plug in a machine on any old power, and we're moving to a world in which only cheap power pays to mine. And once we get there, then renewables have a huge advantage. And then mining can be used to basically balance the load for the grid.
Do you have any compelling statistics about what types of energy use other things use as opposed to Bitcoin? Because the statistics are always Bitcoin uses as much energy as a country, or to mine 1 Bitcoin, you need the power of 28 homes. But then you never hear about legacy finance, washing machines, Christmas lights. I mean, you don't hear actual statistics of like the kilowatt hours and compare. I mean, do you have anything that you can provide our viewers for visualization?
Yeah, there are many of these comparisons out there, like for instance, vampire power from appliances that are plugged in, which are not on, uses multiples of what Bitcoin uses, right? But I don't like those comparisons actually, because I think Bitcoin is only going to use more and more and more power, given its nature, if it's financially successful, and I think it will be. Right? I think instead Bitcoin consumes power in a non-rival way. Right? It's not in competition with other things for power. It's going to use basically free and excess power, and it's going to use a lot of it. And so I see Bitcoin in the future basically running on only power that no one else wants. We produce a lot of power that no one uses. Power people don't understand. It's produced and instantaneously it's gone if it's not used. We don't have massive way of storing power. We have power, it's always on. You plug an appliance in and it runs. We don't think about what's happening to power all the time and where it goes. And 2/3 of all power is just, it goes nowhere. It gets lost in transmission, or
Right.
it just doesn't get used. And Bitcoin is going to be ultimately powered entirely on power that nobody else wants, non-rival consumption, right? That's going to be where Bitcoin ends up as a niche. Right now, is it a rival consumer of power? Somewhat. But in the end, I don't think it will be, and I think that's built into its design in a way.
Are you also saying, though, that as power consumption increases, that power will also be a type of power that doesn't impact our environment negatively?
Yes, I think it'll run entirely on power that would otherwise be wasted. You put it that way.
So what are your thoughts on the ESG narrative? Because it's obviously so important, increasingly so, when it comes to those in political power.
Yeah, the ESG narrative, it's interesting we have this term, like there's one story that's told. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And first of all, I think it's important to say that, Bitcoin's governance is about as fair as governance could possibly be. Everyone who runs a node has a say in the protocol. They choose what software to run on their node. And socially, Bitcoin puts up no barriers to anyone to enter it, unlike the banking industry. And on the environmental front, I think that while Bitcoin uses energy, it can be a net positive for the environment. I think we shouldn't confuse energy use with emissions. And I think that Bitcoin can actually help us decarbonize our energy economy and speed the transition to renewables and nuclear, right? So I think it could be a net positive on the E, on the S, and on the G, right? So I actually think it can be positive. And the idea that I had and I developed with Andrew Bailey, and the whole reason I'm public as a Bitcoiner, is on the E front. I kind of came up with a way of holding Bitcoin that was carbon neutral. Energy positive, but carbon neutral. And the idea, very roughly, if I can share it.
Yes, please.
The idea is that you mine in proportion to your holdings, and you mine with a form of carbon neutral energy, whether that's nuclear or wind or solar or hydro. And if you own, let's say, 1% of all Bitcoin, the prescription is do 1% of all mining yourself with one of these low impact forms of energy, mining. So if, for instance, you own 1% of Bitcoin, you would do 1% of all mining with, let's say, hydro or wind or solar. If you do that and you sort of mine the same percentage of all mining as you own of all Bitcoin, here's the claim: your holdings are carbon neutral. And if the entire network took the advice, then 100% of Bitcoin would be mined using carbon neutral or low carbon methods, right? So basically, by doing your share of that, you are pushing the network towards renewables. And in a way, you're invisible to the network. What you do as a holder, let's say you want to buy one Bitcoin, and you do the equivalent percentage of all mining, which would be 1 over whatever we're at, 19 million, actually minus the lost coins, 1/16 millionth of all mining, and you do that with renewable or nuclear energy. The net effect is that you make the price of Bitcoin go up, but you also make the difficulty go up in equal measure. And if you make the price go up and the difficulty go up, basically your effect on all other miners' bottom lines is zero.
Wow.
You don't make it more profitable for them because you're making difficulty go up.
Huh.
You don't make it, you do make it more profitable for them because you're making price go up, but you're also making their profits go down by making difficulty go up. So if this is we call it an incentive offset. You are giving them incentive to mine by making price go up, but you are giving them incentive not to mine by making difficulty go up. If you put those two incentives into balance, you will give other miners zero incentive either way. It's kind of like you own Bitcoin, but you have given no one else any incentive to mine. All the incentive you've created to mine, you've done yourself. You've mined your own incentive. Right? So this is like a formula which anybody can take or not take as they choose. I'm an environmentalist, but I am not an authoritarian.
Yeah.
I like Bitcoin's freedom go up more than number go up. And people are free to use this idea to express their values if they so choose. But no one should not hold Bitcoin simply because they're worried about their carbon impact. They can hold Bitcoin, and if they do the equivalent amount of mining themselves, which is going to be something like 0.5% of their total investment, very small. If they do the same amount of mining as they own of Bitcoin, the same proportion of all mining as they own of all Bitcoin, then basically they are invisible to other miners because they are helping the miner's balance sheet in one sense that they're driving the price of Bitcoin up, but they're hurting the miner's balance sheet in another sense because they're making difficulty go up.
Right.
Because the network adjusts so that it's 10 minutes. And the net effect is zero on every other miner, except now they are holding Bitcoin. So it's a carbon neutral way of holding Bitcoin. So basically no one should not hold Bitcoin because they're worried about the environment. If they're worried about the environment, they should just do a little amount of mining alongside their holdings. How much? A very small amount. Because the market cap of Bitcoin, what's the market cap of Bitcoin now?
It's like 600 billion, I want to say.
600 billion?
I'll have to check, but I think so.
Okay, 600 billion, and the total revenues from mining last year, 16 billion total revenues. So it's a tiny fraction, right? So basically that ratio should be your ratio of roughly, how much you're mining relative to your holdings. So a very small amount of mining is all that's required to offset the incentive. We call them incentive offsets. Andrew Bailey and I, who wrote this white paper together, called them incentive offsets. You offset the incentive that you're giving to other miners to mine by entering the market with them as a competing miner and driving up difficulty. So you're giving them an incentive by driving up price of Bitcoin, but you're giving a disincentive by competing with them as a miner so that your net effect on all other miners can be zero and you hold Bitcoin.
So have any people or companies said yes for this initiative? They're on board. Have you gotten like Elon Musk to agree to this?
I would love to talk to Elon Musk about this. I certainly tweeted something at him.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to Michael Saylor about this. I'd love to talk to Barry Silbert about this. I have gotten the interest of several companies. I don't know how much I can talk about it, but yes, yes, there's been a lot of interest in it, and there are people working on a product. Because right now the problem is it's hard to mine in proportion to your holdings with the right kind of energy. And by the way, this formula kind of applies to whatever energy you like. So Alex Epstein would be welcome to mine with coal in proportion to his holdings. Right? Sort of, the formula is neutral on what you use. People have their own favorite forms of energy in Bitcoin. I don't know if you've noticed this. Some people
Yes, I've never thought so much about energy or electricity
Isn't
until
it
I got
wild?
into Bitcoin.
The people are real fans of gas or coal or solar or whatever.
Sure.
This is kind of like a formula for realizing that you have an effect on power production when you own Bitcoin. You're creating demand. You can basically meet the demand that you're creating by using power of a certain form and mining. And so this is basically like cleaning up your mess. You can leave your mess to clean up for others to clean up, and it'll just be done at whatever the standard is for the industry. Or you can kind of do it yourself, the incentive, and do it in the way that you see fit. Yeah. So it's just an open formula. I'm not monetizing it myself. I'm not offering a product. It's neutral to how you think mining should happen, the mining that you're incentivizing by holding. You create an incentive when you hold by driving up price. You make the mining more valuable. So when people chase that higher value, you can enter in as a competitor basically with them and make it harder for them to get that value. And so that these two forces that you're offering to the market, driving up price and driving up difficulty, are perfectly balanced.
Right.
And so you're kind of like invisible.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, to start to wrap up, I kind of want to go back to some of the misconceptions that are out there. And I think that right now we're hearing about the EU trying to ban proof of work mining. We know about the efforts to transition the code to something more environmental, essentially turn it into proof of stake. Can you just kind of share, can you just kind of share your message to the public? Because when they hear about proof of stake, like, oh, everything's going to go there eventually, proof of work's bad. What do you want people to know?
Proof of work is a unique security profile. It's different from proof of stake. Proof of stake is replicating the system we already have. It basically hyper concentrates wealth over time by rewarding people who have money with more money. And ultimately, while in the short term proof of stake may seem decentralized, it may seem to offer some kind of monetary freedom, I think in the long term it just turns into the system that we already have, because in a way you get rewarded for, in proof of stake you get rewarded for wealth in the system, and over time that wealth is just going to become hyper concentrated, as I see it, right? But yeah, okay, what was the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, just for folks out there that are hearing the argument of proof of stake versus proof of work, and they're seeing even countries, policymakers, conventions around the world moving more in that direction of crypto over Bitcoin and proof of work. Just what's your takeaway? What's your message?
Okay, proof of work is energy intensive. It's going to use energy, and that is going to, in the short term, lead to emissions. But actually, proof of work provides an off-taker for energy that is currently wasted. And we know what energy is wasted by the energy that's really cheap or negatively priced. Right now, actually, that is renewable energy, like in West Texas. Bitcoin can monetize that energy and help speed our transition to renewables, right? It can turn what is negatively priced right now into money. And that rewards solar and wind build out and speeds us into a new energy future, right? But also proof of stake simply has its own kind of problems. Like I said, it replicates the current system and the injustices within the current system. It is susceptible to different forms of attack. And ultimately the market right now is valuing proof of work very, very highly. And it's not valuing proof of stake very highly, as you can see simply by looking at market cap. I don't know. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
But ultimately, proof of work is a fair system for money. It does require energy, but energy is different from emissions. Like some 2/3 of energy is just thrown away. Bitcoin will ultimately be a non-rival consumer of energy. It's going to feed off energy that no one else is consuming. It's going to feed off waste energy. And the renewable economy is going to produce a lot of waste energy. You cannot control how much wind is blowing and where.
Right.
You can't control when the sun shines and when it doesn't. Ultimately, we're going to have miners that are parked behind the meter at these various facilities, just soaking up and monetizing excess energy. And that is going to, in turn, finance and pay for the build out of new renewable energy and get us over the hump into a new energy economy. So, putting a price on that wasted power and giving it value is actually going to help us transition rather than delay that transition.
I love that. Okay, so if people want to learn more specifically about Bitcoin energy use, environmental impact, these different forms of energy, what are the best resources you can recommend?
We've just written a brief at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, where I'm a fellow. Margot Paz, my co-author, and I wrote a 10-page brief about basically Bitcoin and this issue of energy and the environment.
Great.
And that'd be one place I would send you to, simply the Bitcoin Policy Institute, where our paper is listed. I mean, another is, if follow me on Twitter. I'm at the Trocro, Trocro. And follow the Bitcoin Policy Institute, I would say. We're putting out resources all the time, and we'll be putting out a lot more.
Perfect. By the way, do you know which state mines the most Bitcoin in the United States? Because I was surprised by this answer.
Yeah, I was too. It's Georgia.
Yes. Yeah, when I read that. It's not Texas. I thought it was going to be Texas.
It's kind of remarkable. It's Georgia by a mile.
A lot. Yeah, almost a third.
Yeah. And recent research really upending preconceptions about mining. Texas dominates the mine share, but it doesn't dominate the mining share.
Yeah, it's a really interesting space to learn about. Yeah, it was Georgia, Texas. What's third? Do you know?
Oh, that's a good question. Is it New York? No. Kentucky. Oh.
Kentucky. And California's up there, which I was surprised about because my state's so expensive. But thank you so much, Troy, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it too.